export and flood and distort markets in addition to all the tariffs and barriers they put in place. So the president rightly has concluded that the current status of global trade is bad for America and good for a bunch of other people, and he's going to reset it, and he's absolutely right to do it.
A short time ago, America's top diplomats acknowledged that markets are crashing after President Trump unveiled a slate of tariffs on almost every country that trades with the United States. But Marco Rubio says financial markets will eventually adjust to the new situation. His remarks at NATO headquarters came after China said it would respond to the tariffs with 34% tariffs of its own on all imports from the US starting in April. Well, CNN's Alex Marquardt is following the story for us live from Brussels. And Alex, a lot of conversion issues playing out at one time there in Brussels. Rubio said he doesn't think it's fair to say economies are crashing. What more did you make of those remarks?
Yeah, a little surprised, Christina, that Marco Rubio was defending his boss's tariffs, and he was pushing back on a question about economies around the world crashing. He said that's not happening, but then he rather surprisingly acknowledged that the markets are indeed crashing, and he went on to sort of explain that that's because stock markets around the world are comprised of businesses who have production practices that are not in favor of the United States, and so that's why the U.S. is trying to push this readjustment on the world. He insisted that we have to reset the global order of trade, and he said that those markets will stabilize, businesses will stabilize once the businesses and the markets actually learn the new rules. So he put the onus really on the rest of the world to sort of figure out what the Trump administration is doing, and then he thinks that everything will readjust. This was very much a part of the conversation here at NATO. Of course, the issues that the NATO foreign ministers came here to discuss had nothing to do with trade or the economy, but there was no way that this wasn't going to be part of the conversation, even if not official. It was happening on the sidelines. And I spoke with the Canadian Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly, just yesterday, who said that it's very difficult to have these NATO conversations about defense, about Ukraine and other things while there's a trade war going on. She said that they are putting maximum pressure on the Trump campaign to withdraw these tariffs, but at the same time, the goal here at NATO is to talk about those NATO-specific issues and project a feeling of unity. Christina?
Yeah, and one of those NATO-specific issues was, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war, which he did address, Rubio did address during his briefing in Brussels. Can you tell us more about what his position was on that and those efforts for negotiation?
We've heard this growing feeling of frustration from the Trump administration over what the Russians are doing, or really what they're not doing. President Trump himself has accused Russia of dragging their feet. And Rubio did reveal that before coming here to Brussels, he sat down with the top Kremlin ally and top Putin aide, Kirill Dmitriev, the head of their sovereign wealth fund, who was in Washington earlier this week. And he said that in his meeting with Dmitriev, that he told the Russian that these talks can't go on forever. They don't want to have negotiations after negotiations, and that Russia needs to decide and communicate to the U.S. whether they are indeed serious about peace. This is a little bit more of what Rubio said in answer to a question I asked him.
Hi, I'm Dr. David Costa, the Dean here at Robert Kennedy College in Zurich, Switzerland.
What we're not interested in, and I'm not accusing them of this, I'm just telling you what we're not interested in is negotiations about negotiations. That we're not going to continue this forever. So none of it was threatening. I think it was more an explanation of this is our timeline, and at some point it'll be clear whether you want peace or you don't want peace. And that time is coming. It's pretty short.
So a bit of a warning there that the clock is ticking. In terms of a time frame, we asked him specifically what he was thinking about that, and he said that it's weeks, not months. And so for now, he said that there are no more rounds of talks planned. Of course, we've seen several rounds in Saudi Arabia, both with the Ukrainians and with the Russians. But Rubio also warned that the pressure is growing on the Russians, that it's not just the threats from the administration to apply more sanctions, but from the U.S. Congress as well. So very much telling the Russians that they need to make clear to the U.S. and to the Ukrainians that this is something that they wanted to work on and achieve in a short amount of time.
All right, Alex Marquardt, appreciate your reporting there from Brussels. The US market is open, and we will give those markets a few minutes to settle as trading gets underway. The reaction from China to the tariffs is one factor sending markets tumbling there. Beijing announcing a 34% retaliatory tariff on all imports from the United States. Meantime, we have fresh US data showing the labour market remains strong in March. The US economy added a stronger than expected 228,000 jobs, says the unemployment rate changed only slightly. We'll see as Matt Egan is live for us in New York. Matt, walk us through the numbers that we're seeing here.
Yeah, well, look, this is a job report that painted the picture of a pretty healthy labor market, for now at least, right? This showed that even though some of the initial rounds of tariffs started to kick in March, This jobs work just kept chugging along. 228,000 jobs added. That blew away forecast by almost 100,000. It's an acceleration from January and February, each of which were revised lower. You mentioned the unemployment rate. It did tick higher to 4.2%, but that was expected, and it actually mostly happened for good reasons because more people had entered the labor force. And looking at some of the sectors, we saw government lost jobs as expected because Elon Musk and Billy are cutting federal spending and workforce. But other sectors, leisure, hospitality, retail, healthcare, all of them growing jobs in a very significant way. Now here's the catch though. This is just a snapshot in time, as you can see on that chart showing an acceleration in hiring in March. This is just a snapshot of time. It shows what the job market looked like in March. But we now know that this trade war escalated in a historic way this week, right, with the President of the United States spiking in tariff rates to levels that we have not seen in more than a century. And you noted China firing back with pretty aggressive retaliation. More countries could do that as well. The more retaliation we see, the more damage to U.S. jobs, the more damage to world growth. And so we are hearing more and more concerns from economists and from investors, and I think that we're seeing it on our screens right now with these drops in the market, more concerns about the damage, the economic damage that this trade war could do. JP Morgan last night came out, and they upped their recession probability. They previously thought there was a 40% chance of a U.S. and global recession. They now see a 60% chance. Look, at the end of the day, this economy, this jobs market has been very resilient, bounced back from COVID, survived the inflation crisis, but this is a new test, and this may be the biggest test yet.
Yeah, certainly. 2.5 trillion wiped off global markets so far. Of course, we are having those conversations about possible recession, aren't we? Matt Egan, for now, thank you.
Germans have figured out a way to increase water pressure by 15 times.
Average American right here at this table, because you guys are talking and I don't really understand what it is that you guys are saying. Like seriously, I don't get it. The only thing that a lot of people who have families, who carpool, who go to and from the work, who live in the suburbs, who live in the cities, they're just wondering when things are going to get bad. That's what they're wondering. And all of the macroeconomic talk is going over their head. And honestly, I feel for them. I feel for them because it doesn't seem like anyone is talking directly to them. They're talking to the markets, they're talking to each other, they're talking to the financial system, but no one's telling somebody, hey, at the end of the summer, when you need to buy school supplies for your kids to go back to school when it's backpack time, like that money will be there and those prices will be stable. No one is talking to them. And I think that's the biggest tragedy in all of this.
The truth to be told to them, most people don't want to say. Because we had it today from Jerome Powell, chair of the Fed. For the first, he said there will be higher inflation, there will be slower growth. So the real sadness tonight is the people at home who are looking to retire.
Absolutely.
In the next year or two, and have suddenly seen their retirement funds go down by 20, 30, 40% because they wanted to take advantage of Magnificent Seven and all of those sort of things. Tonight they're wondering, how the heck do I actually do it? This is real life economics, to your point. You're right. And the sort of nonsense that we can all go on.
That's not nonsense.
It's totally true, because you're making a really important point. There is not some kind of 360 plan that has been articulated to America here. You know, Trump said, well, we're going to have to take a little pain. What does that mean? Who's taking the pain? The average working person will be taking the pain because when inflation hits, those are the people that spend 60% of their take home in energy and food, fueling their cars. I mean, we're going to be in a very, very difficult situation.
I find it insane that we're finally concerned about inflation. That was a word that really didn't exist for many years while Joe Biden was president. But I want to point out something. Last night, Richard, you took off your shoe. You said it's made in Vietnam. It's going to be 34% more expensive next year. Today, the Secretary General of Vietnam reached out to President Trump and said, we want to have zero tariffs for both countries, proving to some degree that this is a leverage.
What does that prove, Joe?
What does that prove? Because at the end of the conversation, the president said, nice talking to you. And nothing about, we're going to lower our tariffs. He said, great conversation.
Let's look historically. In 1996, there was a member of Congress who's still on the floor looking at 2% tariffs we had on China, 35% tariffs they had on us. This woman demanded that we have reciprocal tariffs. You know what that was? Nancy Pelosi. 2008, same thing. A guy stood on the Senate floor and lamented. I'm just saying, they lamented the loss of America's workers.
Lowered its tariff barrier to 0. You know what we did? We raised our tariff barrier to 17%.
Again, just going back. Democrats have repeatedly said, I have a list of quotes here, repeatedly said we should have reciprocal tariffs on different countries and did nothing. They're a party of Cory Bookers. Let's just talk about it.
You talk about the Vietnam. I'm so glad you brought up Vietnam. And I'll also bring up Cambodia. The problem with going to zero tariffs with Vietnam and Cambodia. Great. First of all, US exports almost next to nothing to those countries. It's negligible. It's less than 500 million. But let's assume you go to zero. The problem with both of those countries is not the nominal tariff rate of 30%, 15%. It's the non-tariff barriers, the government procurement rules, the ownership rules, everything else that Donald Trump quite rightly said on Wednesday. Quite rightly.
He took his shoe off. He said it's going to be 34% more expensive because of the tariff. Today, the Secretary General, after the party name, the President's called Donald Trump and said, we want to actually negotiate.
But that's not going to help.
Favorable. That would be favorable. The problem is, Democrats have been promising this. Bernie Sanders used to call free trade a right-wing conspiracy or something like that. Never did anything about it. Never did anything about it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got to beg to differ because here's the history. I'm going to give both sides some credit. Trump won. Bob Lighthizer of the USTR comes in and says, you know what, we got to rejigger the global trade system. It was a good thing to say. Tariffs on China, fine. Biden keeps those. Then he actually articulates a real industrial policy. He says, what do we need most of all in this country? Chips. We brought back the semiconductor industry in 18 months. That's how you do this. Trump now comes in, and he had, just to let me finish, he had an opportunity here, actually, given the strength of the U.S. economy at this moment, to really work with allies and say, this is the time. Europe, Canada, Mexico, we're going to go to China and say, here's the new game, and here's how it's going to be played. He didn't do that. He is squandering our
I have to disagree with that slightly because that's not giving President Trump any credit for the amount of foreign investment that has been pledged in this very brief time of this administration. It's most estimates between $2 to $3 trillion commitments from SoftBank, from Taiwan Semi, to bring back. Well, Richard, you scoff. Why do you scoff?
I do, because
These are with the scoffs.
I do. No, you can take them. These are, of course, if it had
They are. It's no
Wisconsin and the factory that was supposed to be built by a company in 2018 never happened. These are promises being made to appease a president to get him off your back. Let's see how much of that
including some promises that were on some plans that were already in the works. Just a second. Including some promises that were made, that were planned when Joe Biden was president and held off to announce after they waited to see who won the election. Businesses are not stupid. They do what they need to do to get in the good graces of Donald Trump. It's not rocket science. I think one last note. They were supposed to have a deal with China on TikTok, supposed to be announced this weekend. That is on hold now. And
why do you think that is, though, Abby?
Well, because China says, we want you to bring down your tariffs, and we're going to hold TikTok hostage until you do. And they're getting their way.
But that's to your initial point. It's part of the negotiation.
I don't think we're on the winning side of that.
If chaos is the only thing that you can count on, people will bet on chaos. And when you're betting on chaos, that keeps you tense. It keeps you tight. You don't move in good faith. You think, hey, this guy changes his mind every single minute, every single hour, and you start to kind of hold on to it.
100% right. Correct.
Good evening, I'm Alicia Menendez, and we begin tonight with the continued fallout from President Trump's Liberation Day global trade war. For a second day, financial markets were in freefall. Today, the Dow Jones dropped just over 2,200 points, making it the worst day for the market since the start of the pandemic. It takes the title away from yesterday's market performance, which saw more than $3 trillion, yes, $18 in losses. Couldn't help that this morning China responded to Trump's new trade attacks by announcing it will impose a 34% retaliatory tariff on all U.S. goods. Economists at J.P. Morgan now raising the odds of a recession to 60%. That is a significant jump from just before the tariff rollout. We heard today from Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who acknowledged that the damage from the trade war will be worse than expected.
While uncertainty remains elevated, it's now becoming clear that tariff increases will be significantly larger than expected. And the same is likely to be true of economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. The size and duration of these effects remain uncertain. While tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation, it's also possible that the effect could be more persistent.
And while all of this is playing out on a global scale, raising concern and confusion of what is to come, Trump spent the day relaxing at his golf resort in Florida. He's about to speak at a $1 million a-person dinner at Mar-a-Lago for a super PAC that supports him. Joining me now, Senator Peter Welch, Democrat from Vermont. Senator, what are you hearing from folks in your state about what this is going to mean for them?
This is hammering them badly. I mean, the inflation that Jerome Powell talked about is real. We're going to pay higher electricity prices, higher home heating fuel prices, higher gasoline prices. It's hitting our farmers hard. They import their grain from Canada. Our manufacturers are going to be paying higher prices. And then with the retaliatory tariffs, we're going to have some manufacturers paying tariffs going out, but they'll be charged, and then paying tariffs when the finished product comes back. And what's happening in Vermont is happening, of course, all around the country. It's really bad.
It is really bad, made worse by the fact that you have a White House and a president who don't even seem to be on the same page about their messaging. Take a listen.
The president made it clear yesterday this is not a negotiation. This is a national emergency.
Let me make this very clear. This is not a negotiation. This is not that. This is a national emergency.
Are you open to deals with these countries if they're calling you?
Well, it depends. If somebody said that we're going to give you something that's so phenomenal, as long as they're giving us something that's good, the tariffs give us great power to negotiate. Always have.
How are other countries, how are businesses in this country supposed to decide what to do when they aren't even told the rules of the game?
Well, they obviously can't. They just are paralyzed. And, you know, what Trump can do, and he's been doing it here, is strong arm businesses or law firms and subject them to his will. What he's finding out with these tariffs is that other countries won't be bullied. In fact, the domestic politics in any country, Canada or the European Union, requires those folks to stand up for the people they represent against the Trump bully that is perceived who he is in those countries. So he's gone a bridge too far. And by the way, I'm seeing cracks in this. You know, a lot of his Republican supporters here in Congress put their faith in Trump. It'll work out. Well, they're seeing that it's catastrophic. Those things that are happening to folks in Vermont are happening to folks in South Carolina or North Carolina. And there is legislation now to restrict that tariff authority. And we have several co-sponsors, and it's led by Chuck Grassley. So I think there's cracks in the armor here. People are seeing what is really happening and not listening to essentially the braggadocio of a president who doesn't have a clue as to what an economic rationale is for this reckless policy.
Let's talk about that Grassley-Cantwell legislation, right? If you get enough votes in the Senate, do you believe there's any shot of it passing through the House, or is it DOA in the House? And if it is DOA in the House, what recourse then does the upper chamber have left?
With the current House, I think it is DOA, but that doesn't mean that it isn't really important, because if we get Senate Republicans to stand up for common sense and say what we all see, and that is this tariff policy of the president is reckless and harmful, that is going to be something that voters in these districts start to see. And when they start talking to their representatives and demand that we stop the pain, stop the punishment of these tariffs that lead to higher prices, that may be something that ultimately affects Trump. But he's a very willful person. That's what's so dangerous about him. He doesn't have any credible economic backing on how this makes sense, but he's kind of a bully, and he's pushing it, and all to the harm of everyday Americans.
David Goggins and Tiffany Haddish, they both wrote incredible books, but did you know they didn't have to write a single page of those books?
Kind of a bully is perhaps the kindest way one could put that. Vermont Senator Peter Welch. Senator, thank you so much for starting us off. Let's bring in our colleague Stephanie Rule, NBC News senior business analyst and host of the 11th Hour. All right, Stephanie, no one explains this stuff better than you. Talk to me first about how China is retaliating.
Okay, no surprise. You know, the idea was everyone else was going to fold. China is retaliating because this is a trade war. And in a trade war, no one wins. And there's something specifically I want to point out about the impact, because we just keep saying this is going to cost individuals so much more money. Think about what this is doing for business, big and small. Over and over, we keep hearing the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, say, we're going to be manufacturing here. The robots are going to do it. What company have you heard in the last 48 hours say we've just brought in a whole bunch of robots and they're going to make the speakers now? What CEO has said we're going to build a factory? And let's be clear, if one were going to build a factory, it would be a multi-billion-dollar commitment. It would take 3 to 5 years to do that. So what's going to happen over the next 5 years? Because if you walk into a shopping mall tomorrow, Alicia, take a look at any of those stores. Do they sell clothes? Do they sell sportswear? Do they sell sneakers? If they do, we don't manufacture those things in the United States. That doesn't exist. I remember Adidas tried to do manufacturing here for 15 years, huge investments. It didn't really work. If you and I wanted to take a walk in the garment district right now in New York City, it'd be a short walk. We don't have one anymore. So when you take a look at so many of these stocks that are crumbling, these are real businesses and real people who have no means to get those clothes now to the United States without paying huge tariffs. And if they do, you and I are going to be paying 25 or 50% more when we're buying our sons sneakers and clothes in the weeks to come. So when we hear from this administration, like a Howard Lutnick, who's saying, oh, the robots are going to do it, what robots? The only CEOs I know about are the ones I've been talking to for the last 72 hours, from big companies, small companies, Wall Street investors. And you know what they're doing? Calling this White House and saying, please stop doing this. It is economic suicide for our consumers, for our voters, and for our businesses.
has reached a record before the 100 days, and it is a record of complete measurable failure. Many of his own advisors and Wall Street allies view it as humiliating. It is something that will not only affect so many people in our country and around the world, but even if you look at it by narrow terms of just the president's record in history, this is now the blemish on his record, not only for the second term, but forever. The record is the self-inflicted choice to wipe out this much value in the stock market over just 2 days. We've been reporting how people are holding onto their hats during this tariff-inflicted meltdown over the last day. Well, tonight as we end the week and have a whole other day of markets, the U.S. stock market has now lost $6.4 trillion in just 2 days. This is Trump's trade war. We are losing because of Trump, because of the choices he's made. The market's tanking, recession fears deepening, and of course, it's the economy stupid. This is not something the Republican Party will be able to lie out of, or to pardon their way out of, or to trick people into thinking that all of the problems they have, from rising prices to job fears to rising costs, that they're not real or they're somebody else's fault. We're also seeing the fear of an anti-Trump, anti-MAGA political backlash as people start to see this candidate who promised to focus on your concerns in the economy has actually, according to many, sold out the American worker.
Don't buy a new car, buy a used rent.
Markets look set to sell off as Donald Trump imposes the steepest U.S. import levies in a century. Stocks set to wave out nearly $2 trillion in market value.
Taking a plunge as investors react to the sweeping tariffs.
Right now, angry heads are prevailing, and right now, circumstances are prevailing that send stock prices much lower than where they are right now.
I struggle for what the president's game plan is. Because if you wanted to make the market crash, I think you would go with this game plan.
I haven't seen it yet. I guess it's close to that. This is the biggest policy mistake in 95 years.
95 years, and we can show you the top 500 companies. These are the largest companies that trade. And whether you trade in the stock market or not, as I've told you, this will affect you because these type of losses come with consequences and eventually job cuts. And of course, the price and inflation issues. This is down another 6% today. Another market index you've heard of, the Dow, shed over 5%. The NASDAQ, another big bucket of stocks, losing just about 6%. This is what they call an official bear market, where you are down a fifth from the peak. Trillions gone. The Fed now warning Trump's tariffs will juice inflation. Remember, that was the big issue. The high prices that helped him over the understandable concern with inflation and the way people blamed then President Biden. Well, Donald Trump's serving up more inflation. That's according to the Fed, which is the independent arm of monetary policy for the federal government. And of course, the risk of recession or slower growth. One of the top banks, JP Morgan, says we have tipped over to a recession now being more likely than not, 60%. That is, based on all the modules they have, it is more likely than not that Trump's choice to do these tariffs will give us a recession that otherwise was less likely. Indeed, before Trump came into office, though, same banks were putting the recession fears much lower, like 20%. The Financial Times, which is sort of the British version of the Wall Street Journal as a Bible for the market, says this is an astonishing act of self-harm by Donald Trump. Then their counterpart that I mentioned in the U.S., Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, quote, someone should sue to block his abuse of power. The Journal, now suddenly concerned about Trump lawlessness, something they have often minimized on other topics. China is hitting back, and boy, do they have the resources and the runway to do it. They're matching the whopping 30% tariff. Economics can be complicated, but this part is simple. I will tell you, America, if I can speak directly with you, you will be paying that tariff. That's exactly how it works, which is exactly why so many people, apart from our divided political times and partisan lenses, so many people, from nonpartisan experts to liberals who warned against this, to Republicans who privately warned against this, although they didn't use any power to try to stop Trump, to Wall Street experts, to, of course, economists explain, yeah, a third, 34% spike, and you're going to pay it, because that's what Donald Trump decided for you. Welcome to Donald Trump's America and his economics. Now, on the politics side, Republicans, late, quietly, with a shuffle step, are starting to see how this could doom their party for even more than one election. Tariffs are upsetting the entire world economy. There's political peril for the party that brought them, and take one of the Republicans who for years has backed Donald Trump ever since they made a power pact when Trump became president the first time, but now a new tune from Ted Cruz.
If the result is our trading partners jack up their tariffs and we have high tariffs everywhere, I think that is a bad outcome for America. Tariffs are a tax on consumers, and I'm not a fan of jacking up taxes on American consumers, so my hope is these tariffs are short-lived.
Hope all you want. We are in deep. We've lost trillions. Even if Donald Trump can see the failure, can hear the markets and the television coverage and the press coverage, savagely noting the savage pain that he's brought to the United States, to consumers, to workers, as well as the rest of the world, that doesn't mean he is known to adjust after going this big and this deep. Other conservatives now admitting the problem.
I'm not going to bubble wrap it. What's happening is not good.
The same people that voted for you, pay by the rules, put away money for taxes, put money away for retirement, are really feeling the brunt of collateral damage of this.
Look, I hate tariffs. I think they're stupid. I think they're backwards. I don't think that they help the American economy. The president has a different opinion.
I'm certainly concerned about what's happening right now in the markets, and I hope the administration's looking at that as well.
It's hard to find a Republican who's willing to do an interview and wants to defend this stuff, which tells you the free fall. Remember, there's been a lot of talk about the trade war and a lot of bluster and some stops and starts, which we covered, but this is now the red hot core of it. These are these first 2 days when it hit this level with these global tariffs and the pain. And in these 2 days, Republicans starting to admit they have a Trump problem. Many of the people you just saw on your screen, they cater to a base that likes Donald Trump and identifies as MAGA, but there are even limits there because they can see that they could lose their jobs, their perch, their audience in the case of some of those commentators because people are paying this pain. When I show you bear market 20% crash territory, after that will come the firings and the job losses. Now, most of the elected Republicans, though, are not yet even trying to use the power they actually have. They can do interviews, but they actually have power in Congress. There's been this push for a Senate bill that would better control and limit Donald Trump's tariff instincts. Most Republicans haven't supported that. A handful did. Meanwhile, business owners are feeling it.
Experts predict prices across the board, including appliances, clothing, groceries, and cars, are expected to go up.
I'm a little afraid that the price will be going up, which means a higher car payment with me, and I have 2 little kids, so that's going to be a little hard for me too.
As a small business, we can't absorb that kind of increase in product. So we're having to reprice.
In one word, how you're feeling about what's happening in the stock market right now?
Anxious? Yeah. I mean, it's not too clear what's going to happen.
Terrified.
Why terrified?
Vulnerable people were always unsafe, and now they're made even more vulnerable.
In less than 24
And that's just a couple days in. There's also resistance. Protesters against the Trump-Musk agenda, as well as this economic pain, say that they have, and you can see the bullets here from this group Hands Off, they have now confirmed protests, often more than one, in every state in the country this weekend. So the chaos is real, the pain is real, and Donald Trump basically walked off the job. Think about this level of economic calamity. When COVID hit and you had to crash, it was everyone's focus. If you go back to another crash that was not caused by U.S. policy or a president saying he didn't care, but rather the sort of complex real estate bubble that burst in 2008, well, everybody was on the job, and Bush was convening meetings with the leaders of the economy, the banks that were so at fault for some of it, and the congressional leadership to figure out every single thing that could be on the table that they could act with all deliberate emergency speed. This is a president who claims emergency powers and wartime powers when there isn't a war, and then walks off the job right now today when we're in this emergency shedding $6 trillion. He went to Mar-a-Lago. He's scheduled to do a weekend golf tour. So he left work early for that, left the White House, wasn't physically on site to deal with any of the type of meetings I mentioned that Bush did, or talk to people in Congress, or anything to even try to quiet the markets and show leadership. He's driving around his golf cart and also making money because it's his private business that's hosting the Saudi event. Markets may burn, but he's counting up his own money, just as I told you. He took a lot of crypto money and thought, oh, as long as he's doing okay, forget everyone else. If he lost $6 trillion, which he doesn't have, I think we would hear a very different tune, and he might even have time to go to work instead of ride around the car. Now, how is this playing out in MAGA land? I showed you the leadership. We heard from Republicans who are running away, but you gotta understand, one of the great political strengths of Donald Trump is the overestimation of his support. I'm sure you watch the news if you're hearing me, and there have been many, many reports and examples of folks who stand by him no matter what, or reverse themselves for him, or come back to him even after doubts. But then you also have to remember, he got fewer votes in 16. He got fewer votes in 20. He blew the midterms in 18. He remains one of the most polarizing and unpopular figures, and then even the base that he does have doesn't stand by him for everything, and certainly not something like this. We began by showing you some of those Republicans who are worried about how many of their supporters, even in red districts, are upset at this self-inflicted economic calamity. That's what it sounds like when your leader lies, ignores all advice, starts an economic global calamity, and costs you a ton of money.
Today, of course, you saw what happened in the markets. The Dow dropped more than 2,000 points today. Not a typo. Dow plunges 2,200 points. Yesterday and today are the first time ever that the Dow has dropped 1,500 points or more on 2 consecutive days. 1,600 points yesterday, 2,200 points today. The S&P 500 dropped 10% in 2 days. It dropped 6% today alone. Just for context, whether or not you watch the markets, whether or not you have any money in the markets or retirement account or whatever, just to get a sense of the scale here. I'll give you 2 metrics here to get a sense of the scale. The first one is the circuit breakers. You know about this? The markets have circuit breakers that kick in when things go off a cliff. That's a mixed metaphor, but I think you know what I mean. They call them trading curbs. And they're these shutoffs that kick in automatically and basically stop the market. They stop people from trading for 15 minutes when things have gone unbelievably wrong. And where those circuit breakers kick in, like the threshold of how bad it has to be before the circuit breakers kick in, is when the S&P drops 7% from the previous day's close. Today, the S&P dropped 6%. And we got to 7, we would have hit the circuit breaker. They would have turned the lights out on the market to try to save us from ourselves. That's one way to understand the severity of what's happened here. And here's another. Look at this. This is the VIX index, VIX. Unlike the stock market graphs where you can tell things are bad when they go down, with the VIX, it's the volatility index, it goes up when things are terrible. It's like the economic crisis meter. And you can see there are just a few big peaks there over time. The first huge peak, that's 2008. That was the global financial disaster of 2008. The worst financial catastrophe since the Great Depression. That's the first big peak. The next big peak is March 2020. That's the equally huge global disaster, right? When the COVID pandemic overran the world, killed millions of people, and basically shut off economic activity like there had been a power outage. So those are the first 2 big peaks there. But now look, new peak. That's now. That's now. That one not caused by the biggest financial catastrophe since the Great Depression or a global pandemic that's killing millions of people. That one caused simply by Donald Trump being president. Again, with his great ideas. And the scale of what he's doing, the scale of the destruction that he has wrought, is a little bit hard to get your head around. I mean, like, you can see the headline writers scrambling to try to find the right words tonight. I mean, here's the Wall Street Journal front page right now. U.S. stocks plunge deeper, capping worst week since 2020, which again was the pandemic. Trump's tariffs set off 2-day sell-off as recessionary fears mount. More than $6 trillion erased from market. This has been the lead analysis piece on CNBC.com all day. Trump's tariffs are biggest policy mistake in 95 years. This is the lead editorial today at the Financial Times. America's astonishing act of self-harm. Got the picture of Trump there, actually kind of puts a nice punctuation mark on that. Look what we've done to ourselves. Hi. But this is the lead, quote, if it endures Donald Trump's decision on April 2nd, 2025, to enact sweeping tariffs on U.S. trade partners, will go down as one of the greatest acts of self-harm in American economic history. His actions will wreak untold damage on households, businesses, and financial markets across the world, upending a global economic order that America benefited from and helped to create. Elsewhere in the FT today, they describe Trump's actions as, quote, strangely self-sabotaging, quote, economic lunacy that might seem better explained by psychologists than economists. Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary, says, quote, this is to economics what creationism is to biology, what astrology is to astronomy, what RFK thought is to vaccine science. The Wall Street Journal summarizes tonight, quote, the Dow Jones Industrial Average became the last of the 3 major financial indices to enter a correction, defined as a decline of 10% or more from a closing peak. After today, the Dow is down 14.9% from its most recent high. The NASDAQ is now a bear market, off 22.7% from its recent high. Anything more than 20% is considered a bear market. The Magnificent 7 stocks, which include Nvidia, Apple, and Amazon, collectively lost $1.55 trillion in market capitalization this week. That is a record. Apple alone saw $443.5 billion in market value evaporate. I mean, it is hard to get your head around how much damage this one man can cause. I think it's even harder to get your head around simultaneously the fact that he can do damage of this magnitude with such a teeny amount of thought. Right? You think it would take like a grand plan plan and some big brains to figure out how to destroy the economy of the richest nation on earth. But that's not how it's working out. Turns out it doesn't take a big idea or a lot of big brains working together. I know that this may be something that you remember, but just in case it's not, I'm just going to put this back on the front page here just for a second. Because do you remember where Trump got the tariff thing from in the first place? Do you remember like when and why and how he started talking about tariffs in the first place? It was in his first campaign for president. Trump didn't really have any formal economic advisors. So he told his son-in-law, Jared, to find him an economic advisor. Trump reportedly gave Jared some vague ideas of what his thoughts were on economic issues. You know, something, make me look tough, China bad, something. Jared then decided to find his father-in-law a financial advisor for his presidential campaign by going on the Amazon.com website and starting to browse books. Not like reading the books, because you can't do that on the Amazon website. He was just looking at the covers, looking at the titles. And he found a book title that he thought was so cool. The title was Death by China. Oh my God, that's so cool. That's so awesome. And that apparently was it. Quote from Vanity Fair. Trump gave Jared a summary of his views and then asked him to do some research. Kushner simply went on Amazon, where he was struck by the title of one book, Death by China, co-authored by a man named Peter Navarro. Jared then cold called Navarro, a well-known trade deficit hawk who agreed to join the team as an economic advisor. Navarro was a major advocate for an aggressive pro-tariff policy. Where did Peter Navarro get his idea that tariffs would be a good policy for America? What was his backup for that conviction? Well, he did have backup from a real expert, who he cited in at least a half dozen of his books, including the one that Jared found on Amazon that fateful day. In all of his books, Peter Navarro has cited an economics expert to justify his views. And the economics expert he cites is somebody named Ron Vera, V-A-R-A, Ron Vera. When Trump won the presidency and entered the White House, this Ron Vera started circulating a memo around Washington in support of Trump using tariffs in trade policy. According to the New York Times, the memo had been, quote, sent from an email address purportedly belonging to Ron Vera. At one point, Ron Vera wrote in the memo that Trump could, quote, ride the tariffs to victory. The problem is Ron Vera doesn't exist. He never has. The economics expert that Peter Navarro has long cited to explain why he's so gung-ho on tariffs, this person, Ron Vera, is a made-up person. He is a fictional person. Peter Navarro invented Ron Vera as his expert source so he could quote this expert source over and over and over again in his crackpot books. Who is Ron Vera? Ron Vera is an anagram of Navarro, which is his last name. I mean, my name anagrams to Macho Wattler, but I don't see myself trying to talk you into doing what Macho Wattler wants, right? But that really is how the Trump administration crafted its tariff policy. That's where Trump came up with the tariff idea. Circulating a fake memo from a fake person with a fake email address in order to make it look like this was a serious issue being debated by real experts. That is the intellectual basis on which Donald Trump today wiped $6 trillion of wealth out of existence and crashed America's markets and brought America and the world to the brink of a self-inflicted, on-purpose, global Great Depression along the lines of what we had in 2008 and what the pandemic inflicted upon us in 2020. This time, the global disaster is Donald Trump's big brain. And Donald Trump may think it's all going to work out. The American people are awake and well aware that this is not going to work out. New Reuters Ipsos polling, to which I would like to bring your attention. Do you approve or disapprove of Donald Trump's handling of his job as president? Disapprove by a 10-point margin. Do you approve or disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the economy specifically? Disapprove by a 15-point margin. Do you approve or disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the issue of international trade? Disapprove by an 18-point margin. Do you approve or disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the issue of your cost of living? Disapprove by a 27-point margin. Is the Trump administration competent or incompetent at running the federal government? Incompetent by a 20-point margin. Is the Trump administration competent or incompetent at rolling out new economic policies? Incompetent by a 25-point margin. Is the Trump administration competent or incompetent at downsizing government without affecting vital services? Incompetent by a 25-point margin. That's before the markets did what they've done in the last 2 days. The American people get it. They get it. They are awake. They are not giving up. And tomorrow, a lot of them are going to show it. Joining us now is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sturkin. Stuart Stevens is Mitt Romney's chief strategist in the 2012 campaign and senior advisor for the Lincoln Project. Maya Rupert, former campaign manager for Julian Castro and former senior advisor for Elizabeth Warren's campaign, joins me in studio. So, Julie, I am curious. What are you hearing from Republicans on the Hill today?
Well, Chris, they are trying their best to really stay behind President Trump as he implements this new round of tariffs, but it's getting increasingly difficult for them to do so, especially after I'm told a number of them have already been hearing from businesses in their state, from business owners, from constituents who are waking up and seeing their 401ks, their savings, the stock market just totally tanked today. And that is causing a number of them to raise some concerns, not going far enough, perhaps, in supporting yet another Democratic resolution that I am told is coming by Senator Tim Kaine to try and rebuke the latest 10% tariffs across the board that Trump instituted yesterday. But they are saying things like this. Watch and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Anybody would be concerned about the tariffs.
Do you think it's the right move?
We'll find out. My own constituents voted for this thing. It's not like Donald Trump is surprising everybody. He signaled his strong support for tariffs from the beginning.
I'm going to digest what it means. I'm going to talk to the businesses in my state and find out what questions they might have and help work through those.
If the tariffs help America, they should move forward. And if the tariffs end up hurting America, I think you'll see President Trump recalibrate.
And Senator Kennedy there last night telling me that he believes the president will need to recalibrate. Remember, he was in a different meeting unrelated to tariffs earlier in the day, so he did have some FaceTime with the president. Republicans certainly concerned about this. And in a new move just a couple of hours ago, Chris, Senator Chuck Grassley, who is a top Republican here, a top Republican on the Senate Finance Committee, joining forces across the aisle with the Democrat Marie Cantwell to introduce a bill that would essentially require the president to give Congress more notice before he intends to impose additional tariffs. It's a small step because, of course, they're not forcing him to peel back some of these tariffs that have already proven themselves harmful today to Americans. But still, notable that he, in fact, Chuck Grassley, is doing that.
So, Stuart, multiple Republican lawmakers have defended these tariffs by saying they trust Donald Trump. But how much time are they willing to give the president?
Yeah, well, I think you're going to see a real split between those that are in swing districts and those that aren't, and that definition of swing district has just expanded tremendously after what we saw on Tuesday. You had margins cut in half in Florida and these overwhelmingly Republican districts last November, and you saw what happened in Wisconsin, where Trump won in the general, and then now this Democrat-favored candidate won the Supreme Court race. You know, I have zero sympathy. In fact, I have just absolute scorn for my old Republicans. Some of these people I helped elect. They went out and bought a ton of heroin, started injecting it, and now are complaining that they're addicted. You know, they brought this on themselves. So they could stop this. They're not powerless. They're actually some of the most powerful people in the world. But they're afraid. They won't stand up to Donald Trump. So maybe after hundreds of thousands of jobs are lost, we've seen trillions of dollars of wealth wiped out in the past 24 hours. Maybe at some point they'll do this out of fear of their own repercussions electorally. But what does it say about, they took an oath to defend America. And everything that Trump is doing, we're putting tariffs on Switzerland, but not Russia. I mean, this is like a bad Saturday Night Live skit. And this guy has no idea what he's doing. He's a criminal. He's corrupt. And Republicans are just all in.
Maya, let's talk about recalibration. I think it's important, and this is courtesy of our friend Steve Retner, to look back at the last time that tariffs were put on by Donald Trump. 2018. One example. It caused prices on washing machines to go up $200 on average. When those tariffs were rescinded, that was during the Biden administration, the price of a washer went down just $75, so you can do math, a net loss for the American consumer of $125. How do you sell something as a member of Congress to constituents who are hurting that history has shown ends up hurting the consumer even after it's pulled back?
Right. And I think that point is one that needs to be hammered by every single Democrat right now. That this is not an issue of he's going to do it and then we're going to fight back. What needs to be the message is that this is something that is going to hurt American consumers going forward. It's going to hurt working families moving forward. And making sure that everyone who is voting for this, what is a tax increase for working people and families are doing so on the record and have to pay for that politically when people start noticing exactly what you're saying, that those prices are going up and they're never going back down. We are making a choice right now that is going to hurt families moving forward, and that is unconscionable when people are suffering the way that they are.
And if you don't buy a washing machine, that's a job for people who make washing machines. Right. It all works together. And Stuart, the Washington Post, beyond Congress, and they've made clear what they are willing to do or not do. CEOs are trying to deal with Trump, but they've been reluctant to speak publicly because they fear becoming targets of Trump's attacks. I mean, look what happened to universities.